Hello everyone, I'm Jennifer with the Lamb Library and welcome to this month's edition of Saturday Science. Now, as you might have guessed from the background and from my t-shirt, we are talking about paleontology today, which is one of my favorite topics, and especially dinosaurs. And if you're watching, and then that means you're probably interested in paleontology and dinosaurs as well. So I hope that you enjoy it. We're going to start with a little presentation where I'll talk about a little more about how fossils are made and show you some examples and places in Colorado where you can find fossils. We are fortunate to live in a state that has lots of different kinds of fossils and some very close to Pueblo. You don't have to travel very far to see them. So we'll start with our presentation. So just a minute to get the slideshow started. So here we go. So paleontology is the study of prehistoric life. Now, prehistoric means they're from a long, long time ago. They're no longer around now. So how do you study something that doesn't exist anymore? Well, paleontologists study the fossilized traces that are left behind, such as bones, like we see down here, leaves and seeds left behind by plants, insects get fossilized as well, and imprints from all different kinds of things. So even though these animals and plants and bugs may not be around anymore, their remains, or at least part of their remains, have been preserved so that we can study them. Now, typically the way most fossils form, for example, if it was a dinosaur, you can see this animal has died on the beach, and he's also left some footprints in the sand. For fossils to form, the conditions have to be just right. So very few animals and plants and other organisms from that time are actually preserved in fossils. So there could possibly be lots of other living things from that time that we don't know anything about because they did not get preserved as fossils. So if the animal dies near water or in water, the body gets washed away into the water. The soft parts of their body, the flesh, decays or is eaten by scavengers, but the bones stay there. And eventually the water level rises or it gets washed into the water. Then sediment gets washed into the water from all the different creeks and rivers that feed into it. And it gradually, over a long period of time, the sediment slowly filters down and covers what's left of the animal. And over time, it builds up, and the intense pressure from all the weight eventually turns it to stone. And then when there are earthquakes and shifting of the land combined with erosion from wind and water, that layer gradually gets brought back up to the surface and parts of the bones may be exposed, and that is how we find them. So in here we can see the bones are preserved as well as the footprints. So there are several different kinds of fossils. Mineralized fossils are when minerals from the groundwater gradually fill the cellular spaces in the bones and eventually replaces it. And these are most often bone and teeth fossils. Then there are cast, where the original material eventually rots or dissolves and washes away and leaves an empty space, so it makes a mold. And this is later filled with different minerals, which turn to rock, so it makes a mold of the original material. And you see this a lot with shellfish in particular, but with other things as well. Then trace fossils are not a direct remain of the organism, but something else that it left behind by its activity. Some of these things most common are footprints. Okay, the footprint is not part of the animal, but it is something the animal made that is left behind. Burrows get filled with minerals and become cast fossils as well. Sometimes nests are preserved. And also their poop can fossilize and turn to stone. And this has a special name called coprolite. Or you can get imprints of other things similar to footprints from an animal. You can get imprints from shells, leaves, and even sometimes from the animals can leave an imprint. So we get some idea of what kind of texture their skin might have had. And then finally, these aren't exactly fossils. These are probably a little closer to mummies, but preserved remains are when the animal or insect becomes encased in either ice or volcanic ash, or sink in a peat bog, or get caught in tree sap, which hardens into amber. So these things preserve the organism. They keep it from rotting, but they allow it to gradually dehydrate a little bit. So it becomes almost mummified. So we see that a lot with animals that came later than dinosaurs, like mammoths in particular. All right, and on the next slide, these are examples of lots of different marine fossils, which means these were water-living organisms at the time. In the upper left corner, we see a brachiopod. And here we see the fossilized shell. And here we see an imprint of a brachiopod shell. So two different kinds of fossils, and sometimes you can get both. This is called an ammonite, and this is what it looks like when it's whole. And a lot of times people will cut them in cross-section and polish them, and you can see all these little chambers as the organism grew, just like we see in snails and other shellfish today. As it gets bigger and bigger, it adds more chambers and more chambers. And a lot of times these chambers get filled with crystals of different colors, so they can be really pretty. And here we have a megalodon, the largest shark that ever lived. Is one of their teeth. And these, people find these a lot off the coast of Florida when they're scuba diving, and also on the beaches in the Carolinas, particularly after hurricanes will stir them up and wash them ashore. I've looked for one in Florida. I never found one. I found some itty bitty shark teeth fossils though. And here is an example of a cast fossil. You can see this was originally one of the snail shells that looks like a corkscrew or spiral. And if you look closely, you see there are gaps here. That is where the original shell actually was. It eventually dissolved away, but inside the shell, the empty space filled with other minerals that hardened into rock and remain and didn't dissolve like the shell did. So this is a cast fossil. It's the inside of the shell. Okay, here is a sea urchin. You might recognize that. It looks a lot like sea urchins we see today without their spines. And then these are called crinoid stem fragments. A crinoid is a really interesting organism. It looks kind of like a flower. It has a stalk, and it has a base that attaches to the ocean floor on some of them. And then it has, at the top of the stalk, it looks like a flower, but it's really a type of animal. And so these pieces are from the stalk section. And so when they die, and they get broken into lots of little pieces, and I used to find a lot of these when I was a kid in the gravel on the road. And then finally, a trilobite. These were kind of like bugs, but not really. And they lived in the ocean and crawled around in the mud. And sometimes you can also find tracks of them. And there are lots of different kinds. Some are big, some are tiny, some stayed flat, some rolled up in a ball, kind of like a roly-poly. So you can find them that way sometimes. So these are some of the more common fossils that are found. Where I grew up in Kentucky, we unfortunately do not have dinosaur fossils, but we would find lots of these crinoid pieces, and you can find brachiopods and trilobites. and fossilized coral too. Now we'll look at some plant fossils. So here we have a tree leaf that looks like it might have been a primitive sycamore. Here we have what you can recognize as ferns. It looks just like ferns we have today. This is the bark from an extinct type of tree. And then here we have some palm leaves. And this one in the middle at the bottom is petrified wood. So that is a piece of a tree trunk that was fossilized and gradually replaced with minerals and turned to stone. And above it, you see a fossilized tree stump that is not too far from here in the fluorescent fossil grounds. So you can go and see several fossilized tree stumps there. There are even some fossilized flowers. And here we have seed cones, so like a pine cone. And you can find those as well. And around fluorescent, there are lots of plant fossils. And we can find lots of different animal fossils. Some of these you can tell what they are. I mean, obviously these are fish, and you might find individual fish. You might find a plate with a whole lot of fish where a lot of them died at once. Here is a lizard, some kind, turtle, and this is actually a primitive horse. The first horses were much smaller than horses are now. They were about the size of dogs. So that was much smaller. And then this one is called an oreodont. It was a large rodent, so similar to squirrels and beavers and mice, things that have these large, big teeth. But this was much larger than today's rodent. This was about the size of a sheep, and some could even be as big as a cow. So animals were often much larger, but then in the case of the horse, they were much smaller. And now finally to our favorite, dinosaur fossils. So, as I mentioned before, Colorado is a great place if you are interested in fossils, and especially if you're interested in dinosaurs. Do you know what Colorado's state fossil is? Did you know we had a state fossil? I didn't. I knew there were state flowers and state birds, but I didn't know there were state fossils until a couple of years ago. And Colorado's happens to be my favorite dinosaur, the Stegosaurus. The first Stegosaurus bones were found in Colorado, just outside of Denver and Morrison. And the most complete Stegosaurus skeleton was found even closer to us, right down the road in the Garden Park area, close to Canyon City. And this is a cast replica of that. That's what it looked like before they got it completely out of the rock. Okay, and here you recognize as Tyrannosaurus Rex. And we have one of the long-necked dinosaurs, possibly an Apatosaurus. And recognize the Triceratops skull from its 3 horns. And then there are even some fossilized dinosaur eggs, and these seem to be mostly found in China. I don't know if any have been found in the United States. And then trace fossils. Remember, these are the ones that are not actually part of the animal but or plant, but what they've left behind from their activities. So this is a large trackway with lots of different kinds of dinosaur footprints that is just a couple hours or so from here in Morrison, outside of Denver. And this is a Triceratops footprint that is also in the Denver area in Golden. Now these are really close to us. These are Ankylosaurus footprints that are on Skyline Drive in Canyon City. So that's just about 45 minutes from here. You can, and this is what it looks like when you have fossils of little burrows made by worms or insects or tiny shellfish. And right here, we see trilobite tracks. So they have several legs, and when they crawl through the mud, they leave these interesting tracks that kind of remind me of the little sand crab tracks at the beach. And these are also from near here in Indian Springs, which is also in the Canyon City area. Now, you can also get trace fossils from plants like these palm leaf imprints that are from the Golden area outside of Denver. And so lots of different kinds. And here again, I'll show you where some of the areas are. So here we are in Pueblo. And just right over here in Canyon City, you can find the Ankylosaurus footprints on Skyline Drive. This is the Garden Park area where Stegosaurus and many other dinosaur bones have been found and are still being found. To the southeast of us, close to La Junta, along the Purgatoire River in Picketwire Canyon, there's a big dinosaur trackway with several different kinds of prints. Unfortunately, that one is a little bit harder to access. You have to be able to hike about 11 miles down into the canyon and back to see them, or you can pay to go on a special tour, but you have to have a large four-wheel drive vehicle to do that because it's very rugged terrain there. And then if you go north to Denver, again, this just west of Denver in the Morris and Golden area is where there are lots more tracks, as well as where the very first Stegosaurus was found. Then on the west, right on the border with, let's go back. Sorry about that. The border of Colorado and Utah is Dinosaur Monument National Park, and there are lots of dinosaur fossils. There are some that have been partially excavated but left in place so you can see what they look like and what position they're found in. I don't remember if there are any tracks there, but there are lots of different bone fossils, and there are also some pictographs, which are not fossils, but archaeological artifacts left by primitive man that are neat to see. And there are also some pictographs down in the Picketwire site. And then, of course, there are lots more dinosaur bones up in Wyoming and in the Badlands further north. But Colorado has plenty of sites within a reasonable driving distance. So if you're into dinosaurs, Colorado is a great place to live. And that's one of the reasons that I moved out here. And again, here are some of the tracks found in Picketwire Canyon and the pictographs there. These are from Dinosaur National Monument. There's a lot more to see there. Okay, these are some fossils that I've collected in the area. There's a private quarry in Florissant where you can pay to hunt for fossils, and you can find mostly plant fossils, a few insects. Every now and then I think someone has found maybe a fish or some other very small animal, but if you look here, you can see there's a leaf there, there's part of a leaf imprint there, and here we have both halves of this leaf imprint. And you see some that are from possibly stems or maybe pine needles. This has a little piece of a texture of bark or possibly a stem from some other plant, and then just other little bits of debris. And then this one over here is a cast fossil of one of the corkscrew snail shells. And if you look, you can see this, the white kind of ring around the parts that are sticking out is the minerals that replace the shell. And then the parts that are sticking above the surface are cast from the inside. So, and I found this, right here by the Pueblo Reservoir. So there are fossils right here in Pueblo too. Now, if you want to become a paleontologist, how do you do that? Well, you need to have a good knowledge of lots of different sciences, but especially geology and biology and math. And if you want to be a professional paleontologist and do that for your job, you're most likely going to need to start with an undergraduate college degree, usually in paleontology or geology or biology, and then get a PhD in paleontology. And you can also specialize. There is more to paleontology than just dinosaurs, even though that might be my favorite kind. Some study only the plants and are paleobotanist. Some may study only vertebrate animals like dinosaurs and some of the other animals. Some may study only the invertebrate animals like some of the shellfish and other marine fossils I showed you. But you can also be an amateur paleontologist or a fossil hound, and you can learn on your own by reading books, and we have a lot of books here at the library you can read, and hunt fossils as a hobby. And there are usually different clubs, either specifically for fossil hunting or just general rock and mineral clubs that you can join, and you can learn a lot from other people in those clubs. All right, and this is just for fun. This is my cat Shadow dressed as a Triceratops. All right, so that's the end of the presentation part. Okay, so now to the fun part. We'll do the activities. We are going to make our own simulated trace fossil of a dinosaur footprint, and then I'm going to show you how to make your own fun dinosaur dig. Some of the ones that you can buy at the store are kind of expensive, and they're usually really hard to do because they're made in plaster. And we're going to do one that's simpler, easier, and cheaper, and you can use it over and over again. So here are some of the things you're going to need. Now, I would suggest that you watch through the video first and then go back and try to do them. It might be a little tricky to try to do them along with me the first time, so it might be best just to watch and listen the first time. So the first thing you will need is one of these kits that we have here at Lamb for you to pick up. If you haven't picked one up already, we have a few left, so you can come by and pick one up. If you want to call first and see if we still have them, feel free, because the video will stay up even after today, so you can watch it again and you can do these later. But you will need this kit, and I'll show you what's in it in just a minute. Some of the items that you will need that are not in the kit. You will need some water. You will need a liquid measuring cup to measure the water. And this is going to be a little messy, so you want some paper towels handy. So we'll have those. You will need a mixing bowl and either a spoon or a spatula. A small stiff spatula like this is perfect for mixing. You will also need some tools later for digging and excavating. So some of the things that work well are like these little tiny precision flathead screwdrivers. You'll need paintbrushes, maybe a plastic knife or skewers. And if you have some toy dinosaurs, you might want to grab a couple of those to use to make their footprints. I've given you a couple, but they're really tiny and their footprints don't show up as well. So you might want, if you have a larger one of your own, you might want to use that. Now, as to what comes in the kit. So first of all is this brochure that goes with the program. And it tells people how to find the video. So once you have gone through it and done it, you might want to pass it on to a friend. It tells you, lists the materials in the kit. It lists the materials you will need, which I just said are bowls, spoon or spatula, water, tools to dig with, paper towels. You'll also need some kind of a plate or dish. A paper plate will do just fine. And in the brochure are the 2 activities with some directions. And then on the back are some questions that we will think about and ways to learn more about dinosaurs and paleontology and information about next month's Saturday Science. So let's get started. So in your kit, you'll find this handy container, and you can take the lid off. and set it aside. And in the container, you'll find a little pot of brown paint, a couple of Q-tips just to help get paint out. You will find a little plastic dinosaur skeleton. Set him aside for a minute. And then you will find 2 small plastic dinosaurs. And so you can see their feet are really small. So if you have some larger ones of your own, you might want to get those. And we'll use the container in a little bit. And then you'll find 3 bags. One has 1 cup of flour. One of them has half a cup of salt. And we'll use those first. And the third one has a cup of cornstarch, and we'll use that one later, so I'll set it aside. So for right now, get your mixing bowl, your flour, and your salt. So you want to be sure you have the right ones. So flour is F-L-O-U-R. All right, so just carefully dump your flour in the bowl. And try not to make a big mess. Now this will be a little bit messy, so if you have a table on your patio or deck outside and it's nice weather, that would be a great place to do this. If you're on your kitchen or dining table, you might want to put down a plastic tablecloth or some newspapers to protect your table. And I always recommend that we have adult supervision when doing any of our science activities. So first I would take, so you've got your flour and your salt. I would kind of mix them up a little bit so they're evenly combined. And I'm going to tilt the screen forward just a little bit so you can see what I'm doing a little more. So we've got those combined. Now we're going to add 1/2 cup of water. So I'm going to measure this out. All right, so we see 1/2 cup, and I'm going to add this. You might not want to add all of your water, just in case you measure a little too much. You can always add extra water, but once you've poured it in, you can't take it out. So just get it all mixed together until it makes a nice dough. Okay, and this is called salt dough, and it's a kind of homemade Play-Doh. So you can use it for all kinds of things, and I've given you enough to make a pretty good sized batch of salt dough. You don't need it all for this activity, so you can save it to use for other things, or you can do this activity multiple times and try different dinosaur footprints to see how they look. And the neat thing about this dough is you can bake your item afterward and dry it out nice and hard and save it. So it's used a lot of time to make ornaments. So we see we have a nice dough here. I'll set my spatula in my water cup for now. Now, if your dough feels like it's too sticky, if you have flour at home, you can add a little more flour. That's why you need to be careful not to add too much water if you don't have flour at home. But if it's too dry and still crumbly, you can add just a little more water. It doesn't take much. So you can see I've got a nice ball of dough. I'll knead it a little bit, just like making bread, until it feels nice and smooth and is all sticking together well. All right, now like I said, you don't need all of this at one time to do the activity, so I'm going to pinch off just a little bit, about half of it to work with for now. And I'm going to set this aside. So now as you can see, the dough is kind of an off-white color. It's not really what the rock that fossils are found in typically looks like. So if you want to give it some color to make it look more rock-like, you can add black or brown food color to the water while you're making it. You could even mix in a few used coffee grounds to give it a little bit of color. Let's set this out of the way. It's looking weird on screen. And the final way is to use this little bit of paint that I've given you. Now you need to be really careful with this paint because this is acrylic. You do not want to get it on your clothes or the furniture because it can be hard to get off. It will wash off your hands with soap and water, but it's still best to try not to get it all over you. So we're going to use a Q-tip and get a little bit of the paint out. And I'm just going to kind of wipe it on the dough a little bit in the center. Okay, just like that. And then I am going to set my Q-tip on the lid from the container. That'll come in handy. So what you can do, okay, kind of roll this up so you're not actually touching the paint. And that way you can get it mixed in without getting it on your skin. So as you see, the paint is starting to show up in streaks. So you can knead it in a little bit until the color is partially mixed in, but it'll look more natural if you leave it kind of streaky. Because you usually see streaks of different minerals and crystals in the rocks. They're not typically just a plain uniform color. So if you can see right there how I've left some streaks. Right, so we'll take this and we're just going to, you can use a rolling pin if you have one handy, but you don't have to have one. And just kind of work it with your fingers, flattening it out. Okay. Oh. All right, so you want to get it fairly thin because we want it to bake and harden, and if it's too thick, it will stay soft. So about as thick as if you were making cookies. All right, so you can see it here. So now we take our toy dinosaurs. You can use the dinosaur skeleton as well. They're a little bit bigger. We have these little dinosaurs. And then if you have a larger one, and just take your plastic dinosaur and press their feet into the dough and make some nice footprints. Just like that. And we'll do some with our smaller guys as well. And I tried to give you a mix of some that walk on 2 feet and one that walks on 4 feet. Okay, another thing you can do if you think they have some interesting skin texture is lay them on their side and press them in the dough and get their skin. Or even if you want to get some bone imprints, press that in there. Okay, and that's all you have to do. And the great thing about this is if you don't like the way it looks the first time, you can just put it back into a ball and knead it smooth and pat it out flat and try again. So I don't know if you can see clearly. Here's what mine looks like. So whoops. So there we go. Once you have decided that you're happy with how your footprints look and which dinosaurs you've used to make them, you will need a grown-up to help you with this. Put it on a baking sheet and bake it in the oven at 250 degrees for a couple of hours. And I want to point out that's a little different than the instructions that I put in here because I made the brochures and printed them all out before I had done my test run. And I believe I said 200. Yes, I said only 200 degrees in here. And I found that 250 works better. And then to be sure it gets baked all through, if you bake it for 2 hours, let it cool completely, and then very carefully lift it and turn it over gently so it doesn't crack. And that's why you want to let it cool because it will crack easy while it's still warm. And then bake it for another 2 hours on the other side and let it cool completely before you touch it. And that will preserve it just like real dinosaur. And this was my test run. So you can see this one is hard. And you can see the footprints really stand out nicely after it's baked. So you can see I've got some nice 3-toed footprints that could be possibly from a T-Rex. And then we see some more rounded, you don't see the toes as clearly on those, from something that walks on all 4 feet, so possibly some kind of long neck. So like an Apatosaurus or Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, since those are smaller than the T-Rex, I would say those are probably from Diplodocus because they were one of the smaller long-necked. So in this you can, as long as you've got it baked up, and I also want to show where I made the skin imprint right here. All right, and so that's that for that one, and you can keep this. And again, like I said, you will have, if you make one that size, you will have, this ball of dough left over, so you can make more than one. If you have siblings that didn't get a kit and you want to share with them and let them make one, you can do that too. You can wrap it up in plastic wrap and put it in a container and put it in the refrigerator and save it to use some other time. You can make whatever you want with it. But this is, working with dough is always a good workout for your hands, and it can be fun, and you can do lots of creative things with it. So I wanted to give you a little extra so you could use your imagination. So I'm going to set that aside, as well as with the demo one I just did. All right, so for our next activity, you're going to need your cornstarch. Okay, so this is the cornstarch. You'll need a mixing bowl again, and I'm just going to use the same one because it won't really hurt if there's a little bit of the flour left in it. Now, cornstarch is very light and fluffy and really tends to get everywhere. So be gentle handling it and be careful when you're dumping it and mixing it so it doesn't get all over the place. And so you're not freezing it because that's not pleasant. All right, so remember, this is 1 cup of cornstarch. Okay, so there we have it in the bowl. And now we're going to add 1/2 cup of water again. So we'll measure out some more water. Okay, and I am going to use a paper towel to wipe off my spatula. Globs of dough on there. Now, even though this salt dough is just made with flour and salt, you still should not put it in your mouth. It's got too much salt for that, and especially once you've added, any paint or coloring to it, you definitely don't want that. All right, so here we have cornstarch and water. So I'm just going to add the water. And again, you might want to hold back just a little bit, and then you're going to start stirring. Now you're going to see this is kind of hard to mix together. Okay, you'll have to scrape. And for this one, a spoon might actually be better. Something that will be stiffer. But I'm going to make the spatula work because I didn't think to bring a spoon for this one. Okay. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but when you do this yourself, you'll see once you get it all dissolved, it starts acting really strange. It looks really wet, but then when you stir it, it kind of breaks into dry chunks. And you can see it looks very liquidy in the bowl. Let's see. But if I hit it with the spatula, it doesn't splash. It actually sounds hard. Okay, and this is, do you know what this is commonly called? Have you done this before? Okay, this is often called oobleck. Does anybody know where the name oobleck comes from? I'm going to let you think about that one for a little bit, and we'll answer that later at the end. So what we see is this sometimes acts as a liquid and sometimes acts as a solid. So it's very hard to stir. It wants to break into pieces. But then if you leave it alone, it runs like a liquid. I'm going to try to show you in my hand without making too big of a mess. So as long as I keep it moving in my hand, if I squeeze it, it's like a dry lump. Okay, can you see it staying in kind of into a ball? But the second I let go, it will start oozing through my fingers. So this is called a non-Newtonian fluid. That means it doesn't follow the usual rules, and sometimes it acts as a liquid and sometimes it acts as a solid. As you can see, it's really messy. Feels really weird, so you can poke your finger and it will feel hard, but if you just put your finger in it very slowly without a lot of pressure, then it goes down in it like a liquid. So it's really neat. So you might want to play with that a little bit before we use it, and that's fine. Then the next thing, you'll need the little container and your skeleton. All right, so the skeleton will fit just right in that container. First, we're going to add our oobleck to our container. And it can be kind of hard to get it all out. So again, this is probably where a metal spoon would be a little bit more helpful than a rubber spatula in getting it all out. And it probably won't take quite all of it to fill your container, not quite to the top. You can see I made a little bit of mess that I'll have to clean up later. And I have it on my hands. So we have our container full of oobleck. And just take your skeleton on its side, and you can just kind of set it there, and it will gradually sink in. And if you have any paint left or any food coloring, you can use that to color your oobleck as well. But I'm just going to leave it white. So it will gradually sink. I'm going to help it a little bit. We'll go down. Okay, there, and it's okay if it still has a little bit of its foot or tail sticking out. Now's the hard part. You have to wait for it to dry, and this one we can't really hurry along by baking in the oven like we could the first one. So you have to just let it sit. You can speed it up by putting it out in the sun for a little while, but you don't want to leave it too long because that can dry it so fast and make it really crack. So it will take about two full days indoors. If you put it out in the sun for a few hours, that'll speed it up a little bit. But as it sets, the cornstarch will start to squeeze out the water, and the water will form a layer on top, and it will gradually dry. So after a couple of days, if you touch it and the surface feels completely dry and not sticky, it might even have a couple little cracks. Then what you will do is just kind of squeeze the sides of your container a little bit to loosen it. I'm going to take this back up so you can see me as I'm talking. So just squeeze the sides a little bit to loosen it, and then invert it over a plate. So it will come out looking something like this. Oops, which the light is too bright for you to see very well. It's a little, it didn't help. Okay, so this is not showing up on camera very well. There we go, if I get a little closer. So if it is dry enough, it'll come out in just a nice square block. This one wasn't quite dry enough, so I had to kind of force it out. So some of it stuck to the bottom a little bit, so it's not quite as pretty, and it's still a little wet. So before you do it, you'll want, once it's dried for a while and you invert it into a dish, you'll want to let it stay like that and dry indoors for one more day to get it nice and dry. And then you'll be ready to dig. So that's when you'll take all your little tools and you can just start breaking this away. You can see this is a lot easier than the ones you buy at the store that are plaster. Let's see if I can adjust the brightness a little. Okay, and you can probably see that some of it is starting to get exposed. Now, the longer you let it dry, the more crumbly this will be. So if you let it dry too long, it may be way too easy so that it's not even fun to do, and it'll just fall apart when you touch it. So you want to do it, you don't want to let it dry too long. So this is actually a pretty good consistency. It's still a little wet, so it takes a little more work to dig it out. So you can just, and again, this is a little bitty precision flathead screwdriver. A skewer would work well. I'm trying to think what else you might have at home that would make good toys. And again, even just, a knife, fork, nothing sharp. Remember, when you're in paleontologist, you don't want to damage the fossils that you're digging for. So you want to be careful. And as you're doing this, it's kind of messy, and if you're doing it outside, you don't really have to worry about it. But if you're doing it indoors, try not to get it flying everywhere. Not only will your grown-up appreciate you not making a huge mess, you can actually reuse this. So as you see, I've got him almost dug out. You can just keep working. And then when you get it mostly dug out, that's where the fine tools like paintbrushes or toothpicks and skewers will come in handy. So you need to get all the matrix, out from between the ribs and from around their toes and from the spaces in their skull. So you just keep digging like that. So there, he's almost out. So you can keep working on it with fine tools, and you use your paintbrush, especially if it's more dry. The paintbrush will be helpful. And then in the end, if there's still some you can't get, of course, you can always just wash it in water and it will dissolve the cornstarch away. But in real life, paleontologists don't have it quite that easy. And now, like I told you, you can actually reuse all this that you've chipped away. And I'll show you what some looks like when it's completely dry. So this is some where I let it really dry out. So it's very dry and crumbly. So you can take that and I'll show you. You could just take the pieces, you could save it, or you could do it right away. Put your cornstarch back in your bowl. And if you've been very careful and saved all of it, use another half cup of water. If you think you lost some of your cornstarch, don't put quite as much water in. And there you go. You can just mix it up and you can do it all over again. You can do another dig if you have something else you want to try putting in there. So this is a great way if you only got one kit and maybe you have a friend or sibling who also wants to do it. You have enough dough to share, and you can reuse your cornstarch to make another dig. Or even if it's dried out, be sure you let it dry out completely before you seal it up because you don't want it to mold. But if you're going to use it right away, and it's all ready to go, and you could pour it in another container and make it all over again. So that is our two activities. Now I'm going to wipe my hands off a little bit before I do our next, show you a few things. So if you'd like to learn more about paleontology, fossils, how you get to be a paleontologist, or more about dinosaurs, then come by the library. We've got lots of great books, and I'll show you a few examples. We have books about fossils and fossil hunting, being a paleontologist. And these are just some examples. We have more than that. We have biographies about famous paleontologists, so that can tell you a little bit more about what it's really like to be a paleontologist. Of course, we have lots of dinosaur books. This is a great one, especially for older readers, because it's a little bit longer and has lots of information about when the first dinosaur bones were discovered and how they studied them and figured out what they were. And we have lots of books about dinosaurs. So we have nice, an encyclopedia type book like this with really nice illustrations about all different kinds of dinosaurs. And then we have books about individual dinosaurs, like Allosaurus, which was kind of like T-Rex, similar, and the Ankylosaurus, which is what made the footprints that are on Skyline Drive in Canyon City. And we have lots more than that. We even have videos, like the dinosaur creature feature that we have in the kids section. And we have some books on dinosaurs and paleontology for adults as well, if your grown-ups would like to learn more. So come by the library and would be happy to help you pick some out. We can always, we have several here at LAM, but if you would like some of the others in the system, we can put a hold on them and have them brought over. It usually just takes a couple of days if they're in. And then on the back brochure, don't forget to check that. So all the factual dinosaur books are in the Dewey Decimal section around the 567. So you can go right to those numbers and find them yourself. You can ask your librarian for help finding that, or for fiction that has to do with dinosaurs and paleontology. And like I said, living in Colorado, we're fortunate to have lots of sites and places to go. And I've listed some on here, and this certainly isn't all of them by any means, but there's the Dinosaur Resource Center in Woodland Park, close to Colorado Springs. There's the tracks on Skyline Drive in Canyon City, the petrified tree stumps and other plant fossils, and the fluorescent fossil beds, and at the private fluorescent quarry. There's lots of different tracks and fossils in Dinosaur Ridge, which is in Morrison, and there's a small visitor center there and museum. There's the Denver Museum of Nature and History, and then Dinosaur Monument National Park on the Colorado-Utah border would be a great place to visit for a longer trip. And then if you're up for serious hiking, again, there is the tracks and the petroglyphs in Picketwire Canyon nearby. All right, so that is it for our paleontology program. Next month, again on the third Saturday of the month, which is May 15th, we will be doing a cryptography program, which has to do with secret codes and hidden messages. And I've got a little secret message on the back here to see if you can crack the code between now and the next Saturday Science. And then if you can't figure it out, we will learn how then. So again, I still have some kits left. I made extras this month because I figured this would be popular. And also, this is one, most of the science kits are more for ages 6 to 10. But this one, as long as there's adult supervision and assistance, even I think a 3-year-old can do this. So I made extra for those. And for the younger ones, I will be doing a dinosaur-themed story time next week as well. So I hope to see you next month and hope you had fun. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I will come back and answer them for you. So take care.